Are those your glasses too? Good evening. Yeah, I feel like somebody should introduce me. I haven't stood up here for a class in at least 13 weeks. I guess more like 14 on a Sunday or a Wednesday class. So if I'm a little rusty, y'all will know why. I'm excited to begin a new study with you. I'm going to have to adjust it. We've had a new PA system put in since I last spoke, and it sounds different. It sounds good, but it's not what I'm used to. I feel like I'm overpowering. Is it sound okay back there? It may just be my loud mouth. I don't know. But as I said, I'm excited to begin a new study with you. Oh, see, I made myself a note because I knew I'd forget, and I did forget. The Brothers Keeper surveys, if you haven't filled one out, we're going to keep that open for, I don't know, maybe another week or two. If you get a chance, fill that out. That's a great chance for you to have some input and help us to make this the best it can be. I noticed on there this is a little free version of what is called SurveyMonkey is the website, and it actually told me that the average user is taking 5 minutes and 42 seconds to fill out the survey. So there you go. If you got 5 minutes and 42 seconds, you can fill that out and you can help us improve this program and have some input and help to make that the best it can be. So I just wanted to give a plug for that. I've had 42 filled out so far. That's a good number, but I'd like to see more. And even if a spouse has filled it out, Miss Becky pointed out to me that at one point that it was not letting multiple submissions, but I fixed that. And so if one of you fills it out, then the other one can go right back, click on the link again, and fill it out. And I know some couples may have filled it out together, and so it may be kind of a combination. And I realize that's going to be some of those. But preferably, I'd like to have multiple. And some of you have put your name on the survey. If you want to do that, that's great, because that helps me. If I have a question or if I need clarification, I can go to you. But if you say, you know what, I'd rather not put my name on that, that's great too. Either way, I'm just trying to, it's a program designed for the congregation, and we want to improve it and make it the best it can be for the congregation. And to do that, we need to hear from you. Obviously, there are things that God has spoken in His Word, and we're not going to go against any of that. But then there are other things where you need input from people, and you need to tailor it to the congregation and to the family. And so that's what we're trying to do. And so I want to get your feedback on that. And again, I think it's been mentioned before, we have printed copies. If you say, I just don't do online, or I'm not very tech savvy or whatever, you don't have to be. I promise you to fill this thing out. But if you're more comfortable with ink and paper or pencil and paper or whatever, that's fine too. We'll make sure we get it to you. Now, that having been said, let's go into our study. I have a book here, and I think it's on the first slide. Oh, I forget what this is. Oh, there we go. Wait, it's not up there, but it's back here. Well, I can see it. Yeah. If you'll turn to your rear. No, I'm just kidding. Jake's going to look at that. But this, I'll show you the book while he's taking a look at that. This is a book written by a good friend of mine. In fact, he was strong encouragement to me when I first began preaching. Brother Tracy Moore preached at the Ironitan Church of Christ. This was before Cliff had gone there. In fact, Cliff came when Tracy left. But Tracy had been our youth guy at Oxford when I was just a teenager and preteen, and he'd worked with our youth there, and I think it was even some while he was going to Faulkner University. And then he took the preaching job at Ironitan. And Tracy came to JSU and to the Jacksonville church, and I was attending JSU at the time. And he did one of our college devotionals one Monday night. We had Monday night devotionals for the college kids. And we were kind of sitting around, several of us talking afterwards, and Tracy was, somehow or another we got talking about church work, and I said something like, I think it would be neat one day to maybe be a deacon in the church and maybe be like a deacon over youth and to work with the youth group because I enjoy working with children. And Tracy said, really, you think that's something you'd like to do? And I said, yeah, I think I would enjoy that. I like working with kids. And he said, well, it's interesting you say that because at Ironiton, we're actually looking at potentially hiring a summer youth worker, like a summer intern or something. And if you really think you might be interested in that, I'll mention it to the elders. And they might be willing to talk to you about that, and that might be a possibility. And I said, sure. And so later on, he called me and he said, hey, are you still interested in that? And I said, yeah, I think so. And so they had me come in, and I met with the elders, and I was scared to death. I don't think I'd ever been in an elders meeting before. And they talked to me about it, and they basically said, well, we'd like to ask you to do that if you're interested. And so I said, okay. And about a week or two later, they said, we want you to conduct a service with the young men, and by the way, we want you to preach the sermon. And I said, you want me to do what? And they said, you can do it. We want you to preach the sermon. Tracy will help you. And Cliff Goodwin was working with the youth at Oxford at that time and said, Cliff, we know you're good buddies with Cliff. He'll help you. So I preached my first sermon. Was scared to death, and I got through it, and I remember thinking, this is what I want to do. And so that's kind of how I got my start preaching. Tracy and Cliff encouraged me, and I ended up going to Memphis School of Preaching, of course. But Tracy wrote this book. This actually has been published in the last, 5 or 6 years. But Tracy is, I'm not sure, I think he's in Tennessee somewhere now. But anyway, it's dealing with personalities, as you see on the slide here, understanding individual personalities. I bought this book, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I bought it last year at PTP. And it's one of those that kind of sat aside and you say, I want to get around to reading that one of these days. Well, finally I did, and I read it very quickly, which is saying something for me because I'm a slow reader. And it's a really tremendous study. I've even heard other people talk about it that said they did a study in their congregation, and it helps us to understand our own personalities, but it also helps us understand other people's personalities. Every personality has strengths. Every personality has weaknesses. And what sometimes happens is when two people with very different personalities come together, they clash. And sometimes I get to thinking, if I'm not careful, that people like me that have my personality, that's good. And people that have that other personality that maybe I don't get along with so well, they're bad. And they're just, what it comes down to many times is different. And different is not always bad. In fact, sometimes it can be quite the opposite. Sometimes the person who's sitting there thinking, well, you're not like me, so you're bad, that can be the one who needs an attitude adjustment or a personality adjustment, as the case may be. Understand, personalities were given to us by God. There's some extent to which you can't adjust that. But what we want to understand, and we'll see as we go through this, every personality has strengths, every personality has weaknesses. We'll look at this, and we'll look at each personality type. We'll talk about the strengths. We'll talk about the weaknesses. We'll look at some Bible characters. Bible characters were just that. They're people. And so you're going to see in the Bible as you study it and you learn about these personality types that these guys and even some of the women, when there's enough information given in the Bible, you see personalities come out. And you see these different personality types. And so we'll look at the strengths, the weaknesses, some Bible examples. And we'll also look at Jesus and how these personalities relate to him. We'll talk about it in relation to how we get along in the church. It's amazing. It's one of those things that as we look, there are times when congregations will experience turmoil. And sometimes that's of a doctrinal nature, because I've seen situations where there were people that were just determined to push change, unscriptural change, upon a congregation. And there were those in leadership that stood strong against it, and so the congregation split, because at some point you have to decide, am I going to follow the Bible or am I going to split off and go and do my own thing? But how often do we see personalities driving conflict in the church? And so I think that's one of the blessings and the benefits, if we'll study it and make application, that we'll see in this study. I'll be the first to tell you, when I looked, and you're going to notice when you go through this, and you'll begin to see things as we go through certain personality types, and you'll say, that's me. I mean, that one's me for sure. What you'll also see, by the way, is probably you're going to have two different types that are a little more dominant. Some people will say, I am 100% this kind. But sometimes you'll say, well, I see this, and I also see this one, and that's normal. But as I studied it, I saw one of my personality types, and I said, oh man, that is me to a T right there. And then he goes and he says, here are the weaknesses. And I began to read that, and I said, ooh, that's me. And you know, you begin to realize there are things, there are certain strengths to these personalities, but there are also things that maybe you'll find I need to work on this. And then you look at the other personality types, and I saw sometimes looking at the other personalities, and I go, okay, I can think of a conflict I had maybe years gone by, maybe even not that far gone by, where maybe I've not a fight or argument necessarily, but just a disagreement with a brother or a sister, and I realized that's those different personalities. And so I hope that you will be as benefited by this study as I was. I mean, I will be like I said, I'm excited about teaching this because I realized as I studied it, I thought, man, I wish I'd studied this years ago, because it helps to change how we deal with people, and we begin to understand people better. We begin to understand ourselves better, which leads us to get along better with others and understand them better. A lot of this study, and Tracy mentions this in the book, is taken from, let me make sure I got the name right, Florence Littauer. She's done a lot of study on personality types, and some of this even goes back to Greek, Hippocrates and some of those others, and in fact the names even go back to that, these 4 dominant personality types. And you could go a lot more in depth with personality study. Obviously we're not in this to do a personality class. We're trying to accomplish a goal of having better unity, as you see there with the verse. I don't know if you can see that, that's kind of small font, but endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, Ephesians 4:2. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, to strengthen our unity. We have great unity here. I think that's obvious, but you know what? We're still, at the end of the day, we're still people, and we're all different. We have different personalities, and we want to make sure that we are aware of these things so that we can maximize the strengths and try to minimize the weaknesses. And that's what it's all about, in increasing unity. So understand that. The underlying basis is Florence Littauer's work. Tracy kind of translates it into the spiritual realm and does an excellent job of doing that. And so I will rely a lot on the book, but also we'll veer off and insert some things here and there. I'm also trying to get used to having a screen back there. You're going to see me turn around and do this a lot just out of habit, I'm sure. But that's nice to have that back there, even though sometimes I'm forgetting to use it. Sanguine. Here, let's list these 4 personality types, and then we'll go from there. Sanguine is the first kind. These names, sanguine and choleric and so forth, these are the old Greek names, and they had, we could get into all the reasons for that, but we won't take time to discuss that. But basically, sanguine is the life of the party. And a lot of people have trouble remembering these because these words are weird to us, and they're not words that we use every day, like sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic. And so Tracy suggested his book using, especially for people who are visual learners, you think of a car. And I don't know, you may think of these differently, but this is kind of how I thought about it, and I'll explain my reasoning for each one of these. But you think the life of the party, you think the flashy sports car, the Lamborghini. And so here's the sanguine. They are the life of the party. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment, but that's the visual image I get, and I associate that with sanguine. So if I'm reading through and something in the book talks about a sanguine personality, I don't have to stop and think, what was that again, and go back to the front of the book and try to look it up. I remember, he's the sports car, man. That's the life of the party. He rolls up, everybody knows because he's got the engine revving and the flashy car. That's sanguine. Next would be the choleric. Now, the choleric is the leader. This is the person, one of the things he mentions, sanguines are flashy, they're ready for adventure. The choleric, this is a leader, and they will plow through anything to complete a goal. I think about, here's a person in one of those big military style. I even started to get I found a good image of this one, but I was even thinking about going with the military style Hummer. They're just going to plow through anything to accomplish their goal. They're very goal-oriented, goal-driven people. They're leaders. That's the choleric personality. And then there is the phlegmatic, the peacemaker. I think about some laid-back person. They're driving their smart car, their hybrid or whatever, and they're just, that's kind of the more laid-back personality, because here's a peacemaker, the phlegmatic. And so when I think about them, I think about a peacemaker. We could also say these are people who are going to they're going to bring about peace. They're going to strive for peace in all situations. And sometimes, as we'll see in just it'll be a few weeks, sometimes their greatest strength can also be their greatest weaknesses, and that's true of all these personality types. And then you have the geniuses of society, very economical, and this is where I kind of struggled with the car illustration, because you could talk about economical and you could use the little hybrid or smart car or whatever, electric vehicle. But, I thought about a melancholy, I think about a perfectionist. And so I found this picture of the ultimate driving machine, the BMW. They're going to have the luxurious, I'm going for perfection here. And so whatever vehicle you might use to help you think of it, that's kind of the key words for each of these. The sanguine is the life of the party. They're adventurous, they're flashy. The choleric is the leader, and they plow through obstacles to reach their goals. And then the phlegmatic is the peacemaker. And of course, the melancholy is the perfectionist. So if you've got a better image that you can keep in your mind to help keep those straight, wonderful. But that's just kind of what I was thinking of, and I know I'm a visual learner, so I thought that might be helpful to you as well, to have something to visualize this. Now let's talk about, there is one more thing I want to mention. What you'll notice is that the sanguine personality and the choleric personality tend to be more extroverted, and phlegmatic and melancholy, your peacemakers and your perfectionists, tend to be more introverted. It's not to say that if you're a sanguine personality, you're always going to be extroverted. In fact, sometimes people will look at these and they'll study these and they'll say, you know what, I think I'm a little bit of sanguine, but I'm also a little bit of phlegmatic. And I have those two dominant types, and one's introverted and one's extroverted. And so sometimes people even feel conflicted. Sometimes I'm very extroverted and I just want to be around people, and I'm ready to be adventurous and the life of the party, but there's sometimes and I just kind of want to be withdrawn and I don't want to be around people. And sometimes that happens. There can be two different dominant types, but typically the extroverts are sanguines, cholerics, and the introverts are the phlegmatics and the melancholies. So you'll see that as well just in the descriptions of these. So let's talk about, as we meet the congregation, there are these preacher and his work classes that sometimes you'll take, and Brother Wendell Winkler, Tracy mentions this in his class, in his book, that Brother Winkler taught a class at Faulkner for many years, preacher and his work, and we took these classes at Memphis and had various ones teach depending on what we were studying that particular quarter. But sometimes you'll have these meet the congregation type things where you talk about different brethren, and you give them names, Brother Cantankerous and Sister, going to take up all your time, or all this. They give these different names to people, and then there's Brother Pick Me Up. He's going to be a cheerful, pick you up kind of person. All these different personalities. But in our situation, we're looking at 4. Obviously, we don't have time to look at every single type of individual detailed personality, but we're going to look at these 4 generalizations, and each one, it's interesting in the book, he gives them names. And so these two, this couple is Sam and Samantha Sanguine. And so we want to look and talk about Sam and Samantha Sanguine. Notice, first of all, this is a very fun-loving couple. These people, they're adventurous, they like to have fun. And so they place membership at our congregation, and what you notice immediately is this is a very appealing personality. These people, they come right in. There is no getting to know everybody time period. They just, boom, they're there. And they are very appealing, very easy to get along with. You could talk to them. They're a wonderful couple. They bring desperately needed life to any congregation. That's what you'll notice first and foremost about Sam and Samantha Sanguine. They just bring life into the congregation. Wherever they go, they bring life. But there are also a few identifying characteristics, and that's what we're going to look at here in the next few slides. They are life givers. We already pointed this out. As soon as the sanguine enters the room, they oftentimes light up a room just by their presence. A lot of times, you could be up here at the front talking to somebody, and you may know when a sanguine enters the front door of the church building. You haven't even seen them. You just know. There may be laughter going on in the foyer. there may be you can hear the volume pick up a little bit, not because somebody's shouting, but because people are they're fellowshipping, they're talking, they're having a good time, and it's because a sanguine has entered the building. That's this personality. That's how they are. So as soon as they enter the room, they have a natural charisma that will draw other people to them. Sanguines are very enthusiastic people. They're enthusiastic about just about anything. I mean, it may be the new songs that are in the songbook, songs we never sung before. Oh, that sounds great. Let's learn a new song. Teach us a new song. It may be the elders presenting a new work or changes to a work or something like that. Man, they're excited about that. It may be new Bible classes. They're excited about these new classes that are going to be offered. Whatever you bring up, the sanguine wants to do that. Adventure, remember? Sanguine's enthusiasm is desperately needed in the church, isn't it? Can you imagine a congregation without anybody getting fired up and excited about a new work or a new program or whatever it might be? Wouldn't that be boring? The sanguines, I mean, they bring the life, and they're excited. Reminds us of Ecclesiastes 9:10. What does the wise man say there? Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. Boy, the sanguine lives by that verse. You could have them sweeping floors, and they're going to do it with all they got. That's the sanguine personality. Colossians 3:23, do what you do heartily as unto the Lord. That's the sanguine's motto. I mean, that's kind of how they live their lives. They are life-giving people. Not only that, we could also say under this, sanguines, they love church get-togethers. They love church gatherings. They're a great example of Christian hospitality, as Peter talks about in 1 Peter 4:9. In fact, it's funny, sanguines will typically organize the best functions. And what I was going to say about kind of humorous is that if you were to arrive around Christmas at a sanguine personality house, you might see the Christmas lights before you even see the neighborhood. That's that personality. You might walk inside and Christmas music is blaring, and you might be drinking out of Santa mugs and Santa-shaped, all the little shaped, Christmas tree-shaped cookies and things like that, and the lights. You get inside and you're treated to more lights and the music, and there are going to be at least 4 or 5 Christmas trees, right? That's the sanguine personality. I mean, the flash, the adventure, and that's just one example looking at Christmas decorations and stuff, but that's kind of how that's that personality. Not only that, these are people that they don't handle very well living in a subdivision that has rules and regulations and an HOA, a homeowners association, because the homeowners association wants everything to be exactly the same, right? They want everybody's house to look just like the other, and they got these rules and these regulations, and you know what a sanguine says? That's boring. I don't like that. I got to be able to be individual. That's kind of how they live. That's their personality. They like individuality, and they're going to feel a compulsion to add color, to add life to anything that they perceive as dull. And what will happen sometimes is you have some people that are not so sanguine, and they'll say, "Oh, this guy, he can't follow rules," and it could get to that point. But it may just be that here's a person that's expressing some individuality, and we want to be careful that we don't just say, "Oh, he don't want to follow any rules. He's a rebel." It may just be someone who's individual, got that sanguine personality, and they're trying to add color to what they perceive as dull. Of course, the sanguine has to be careful not to turn around and say to somebody, "You're dull. I'm just trying to liven you up." Different personalities, you see. Just a few examples. Think painting bases in the cul-de-sac so the kids can play baseball or kickball or whatever it might be. Oh, somebody, you can't do that. Sanguines, it's boring, this cul-de-sac. Let's turn it into a little small field here, and we'll play some games, paint some bases. Maybe I want to get that largemouth bass mailbox, or the big tall mailbox that says airmail on it. You ever see those going down the road sometimes? And the HOA is going, "You can't do that." That'd drive a sanguine crazy. It may be flying a big flag. I saw something during the hockey playoffs one year where a Blues fan up in the St. Louis area, he was getting in trouble with his homeowners association because he was flying this big giant St. Louis Blues flag during the playoffs. And they said, you got to take that down. We're not going to have that. There have been stuff come up in the last few years about homeowners association trying to tell people they couldn't even fly the American flag because they had some kind of policy. It gets ridiculous, but these are people, they got their rules and their regulations, and the Sanguine says, I'm having none of that. I got to be individual. And if I want to fly a pirate flag, or if I want to fly the American flag or the Blues flag or whatever it might be, I'm going to fly that in my yard. People sometimes even cutting designs in their grass. I've seen seen stories where homeowners associations got upset about that. That's the Sanguine, though. Life-giving. They're full of life and energy. But they're also motivators. These are motivating people. That natural charisma inspires others to follow. They have energy and excitement that is contagious. You get around them and it spills over, and they begin to get other people excited about things. That new work, that new program, that new Bible class, they're so excited about it. Next thing you know, other people are excited about it because they're motivating that excitement. You see why they're so important to the church? They can charm almost anybody into carrying out a task. There's an old book, you may have already thought about this, written by Mark Twain, about a young man. What was his name? Well, Huck Finn was one of them, but I'm thinking of Tom Sawyer. And Tom, if I remember the story right, he ditched school, and so Aunt Polly decides he's going to have to do what as punishment? He's got to whitewash or paint the fence. And not only that, he's got to do it when? On Saturday, bless his heart. And so Tom has this horrible task before him. He can't go out and play with his friends and all this. He's got to paint this fence, and he eyeballs the fence. I went to make sure I remember the story right, and I was reading some of it, and he's eyeballing just how long this stretch of fence is. It looks endless to him that he's got to paint. But you know what he starts to do? Who remembers what he does? He gets his friends to paint the fence. How on earth would a guy get his friends to do this horrible job of having to paint a fence? He motivated them. He was a sanguine personality. And he begins to make his friends think it's so much fun. In fact, the first guy that comes along and he talks into doing it, not only did he start painting the fence for Tom, he gave him his apple. He said, well, you give me your apple and I might let you paint some of this fence. Oh, hey, have my apple then. Let me at it. And then another friend comes along, and another friend comes along. You know what? The fence ends up with 3 coats. And Tom ends up with all kind of trinkets from his friends and food that they have given him in exchange for the privilege of whitewashing that fence. You see how a sanguine can motivate people? That's what they do. They can motivate people, and that's one of their strengths and one of their positives. Because again, you think about works of the church, people living their lives right before God. Does that need some motivation? Do we need people to help motivate? It's a good thing. A sanguine is a master at motivating others. And man, they can accomplish great things because they're talented, yes, but they can also motivate people who they realize are honestly far more talented than they are. And they can motivate them to get involved and to help to carry out these things. So they're life givers, they're motivators, they're also people pleasers. A sanguine can sometimes be self-centered, and that's something they have to watch out for sometimes, but they like to please others. This kind of goes with their desire to be liked, to be popular. You see a person who really wants people to like them. They want to fit in, they want to be popular. That typically is a strong sanguine type personality. And being a people pleaser, sometimes we say that as a bad thing, but it's not necessarily inherently a bad quality. Because you have some folks that get more concerned about themselves than they are about the feelings of other people. And so when we say people pleaser, we mean worried about thinking about others and their feelings and not just one's own. That's a sanguine quality. Sanguines will get great satisfaction from pleasing others. And they love the applause from the audience. They love approval from other people. I think about Sister Vera at Greens Lake Road. She's dead now, gone on her reward. But Sister Vera Shelton was, she was a sanguine. You knew when Sister Vera walked in the building. And she would tell these silly jokes that she had told to you 100 times, but she'd tell them and just get as big a kick out of them the 100th time as the first time. And she would come up, and it didn't matter if you were young or old. She had gum and she had candy, and she was going to give it to you. And you know where all the children went as soon as service started or ended. They went to Sister Vera. But do you know who got the most out of that? Sister Vera. That just lit her up when those children would come and they wanted to see her. And yeah, they were children and they were coming because they wanted to get some candy. They also loved her. But she enjoyed that. She got as much out of that as they did. What about the fellow one time I saw a brother at Highland, the Highland Church, and he came in one night and he was wearing a tie, and I said, I really like that tie. And I was just trying to compliment the guy. I thought it was a nice looking tie. And it just went really well with the suit he had on. I said, that is sharp, man. You look nice tonight. And I worked with the guy. And I came in the next day and that tie was on my desk. He just gave it to me. That's a sanguine for you. They love applause. They love approval. And they like to please people. They can be self-centered sometimes, but they're typically looking to, how do other people feel about this? What can I do to please other people? They really understand Acts 20:35, where Paul quotes Jesus. What did Jesus say? It's more blessed to give than to receive. A sanguine gets that. Romans 15:1-3, Paul talks about not just he's talking about this in the context of scruples and looking out for the weaker brother. He says not just looking out for yourself, but looking at how you can help others, how you can encourage others. Sanguines get that. And that's one of their strong positives. But anybody, any personality, and we'll notice this with all of them, there are positives, but there are also negatives. What are some negatives that a sanguine might deal with? Well, a sanguine can be a compulsive talker. They can be compulsive talkers. They love to talk. And this can be good, but if you take it to an extreme, it becomes negative. What is it James says? Let every man be quick to hear or swift to hear and slow to speak. But sometimes sanguines struggle with the exact opposite. They're swift to speak and slow to hear. And that can be a weakness or a negative that sometimes sanguines deal with. Sanguines don't like silence. They don't like dead spaces in the congregation. They feel obligated to keep a conversation going, so they'll just talk to keep a conversation from becoming boring. But what they sometimes don't realize is that compulsive talking can itself be boring to the person who has to sit and listen to it. And a sanguine has to watch out for that. Proverbs 15:23 talks about a word fitly spoken. Not just rambling for the sake of rambling, but a word fitly spoken. Sanguines can have that as a negative if they're not careful. Sometimes you can have a well-meaning sanguine that will dominate Bible class or interrupt others or comment on every single thing the church does. And sometimes it's just idle conversation. I'm not talking about when it's meaningful, but there could just be compulsive talking. They don't like silence. It's awkward to a sanguine when there's silence or a dead space in the congregation. Another type personality might sit there for hours in complete silence. I can think of even family members. They could sit there, not say 5 words to one another, leave and say, enjoyed the visit. That would kill me. Don't y'all laugh. Y'all were thinking when I said compulsive talker, I knew somebody was thinking that. I'm a sanguine, definitely. I've got that as one of my dominant personality traits. Sanguines, they mean well, but they often don't think first. That just sometimes is a danger. Proverbs 10:19. Somebody look that up. I'm forgetting the exact wording. It's dealing with the multitude of words. There wanteth not sin. Something. Say the first part again.
In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking.
In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. So, if we're a personality that tends to talk a lot, that's something we really got to be on guard against. But you see, a sanguine, it feels so awkward when there's that dead space or that silence. We want to fill it with talking. And so sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes that can be a bad thing as well. Another negative for the sanguine is exaggerator. One of their unique qualities, characteristics of a sanguine is storytelling ability. They can put energy, enthusiasm into a story, and they can make it entertaining many times. But they are prone to exaggerate parts of the story sometimes. In fact, little small events can become major events. And in fact, sometimes you even hear people talk about preacher stories. A lot of preachers are sanguine type personalities, and sometimes they'll take something and just completely exaggerate it to make a point. I don't think that's necessarily wrong if you identify or point out to your audience that it didn't really happen this way, but here's what a point I'm making for for points of for purpose of illustration. But sometimes it gets really, really exaggerated, and it may be due to their underlying need to be accepted. Sanguines, again, they want to be popular, they want to be liked, and sometimes they realize that maybe the better the story, the more people are going to like the story, and the more the people are going to like them. And sometimes that story grows every time they tell it, right? Kind of like the fisherman story. We joke about fish stories. That's kind of that type, what we're talking about. My son, one of my sons, I won't identify which, but it was not all that long ago since moving to Bremen that he came in one day and he was, you're not going to believe, Mom just yelled at the person at Pizza Hut. We went through the drive-thru. Mom yelled at him. He's telling me about this, and I'm sitting here, what? And so I come in, foolish me, believed what the child said, and sometimes that can be a problem. Is that sanguines also can be over-impulsive, as we'll see in just a moment. So I was over-impulsive, and I listened, and I come in and I said, Reagan, what are you doing? People are going to be talking about the new preacher, and now his wife's yelling at the people at Pizza Hut. And she says, what are you talking about? I said, he told me. She said, do you know what happened? And I said, well, no, I guess I don't now that you mention it. Why don't you tell me? And she said, I came through. We were really pushed for time. They were trying to get somewhere. It may have been to piano lessons or something. And what had happened was the lady said, I'm very sorry. They made the wrong pizza. We messed up. It was our fault. We're going to make another one right now. It's just going to be a couple of minutes. And she said, I told the worker, look, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I think it was supposed to be cheese, and they put pepperoni on it. She said, we'll eat the pepperoni. Don't worry. It's fine. The kids will eat it. No problem. No, we're going to make it right. She said, look, it's fine. I'm okay with it. But we've got to go. We don't have time to wait, or I would. She said, are you sure? Yes, ma'am, I'm sure. Between there and here, that became Mama yelled at the worker at Pizza Hut and went off, I think was the exact phrase that was used. She went off on that worker. What in the world? I mean, you talk about feeling like a complete fool. I felt like a fool because I bought that. That's a sanguine exaggerating. That story will grow sometimes every time they tell it. And it's cute and laughable in children, but it's not so cute in adults, is it? For one thing, it may just be downright annoying to other people, but many times it'll completely destroy trust. It gets to where you doubt everything that this person says. In fact, sometimes it happens with this particular child of mine. There's a saying in our house, well, you know how he likes to exaggerate. And so everything begins to be treated with a little bit of distrust. I need some more verification before I accept this at the face value of what you're telling me. That's a potential negative for the sanguine personality. But the other one, as I've already mentioned, is being over-impulsive. A sanguine can be over-impulsive. Being impulsive is not always a bad thing, but we do need to be cautious. Sometimes on an impulse, a sanguine might in fact, Tracy gives the illustration in the book of a Christian family. They got in their car and started driving. This was like somewhere up toward north. It wasn't like up in the north, but getting that way. They just started driving. They didn't have any plans. They drove till they got to Florida. It was like a Sunday afternoon drive. They get down there. They don't have clothes. They don't have a change of clothes. They don't have toiletries. Nothing. So they had to go shopping and spend a whole lot of money on buying this stuff, but the dad was a strong, sanguine personality. That's that impulse. But it could be a good thing. On impulse, a sanguine might see a brother or sister in Christ, or even somebody who's not a brother or sister in Christ in need, and just on impulse buy them a meal or do something for them, help them out in some way. So it's not always a bad thing. Sanguines have good intentions, and they often do things that on impulse will feel right. But the Bible warns us not to let emotion rule our actions. Proverbs 19:2. Somebody look that up for me. And Romans 10:2. Somebody else to read that one. Who wants Proverbs 19:2? Oh, you got it, Brother Gary? Go ahead.
Also, it is not good for a soul to be without knowledge, and he sins who hastens with his feet.
He sins who hastens with his feet. Impulsive. You can get yourself into a lot of trouble with that, right? Well-meaning. He gives the illustration in the book. This kind of goes with compulsive talker and over-impulsive, but Tracy mentions that he's got a strong sanguine personality. He visited a man, he was preaching, and he visited a man in the hospital, a member of the congregation. He'd had a leg amputated. And so in the process of this visit, the man says, well, the doctors say I should get to come home tomorrow. And without even thinking, he said, I bet when they told you that, you were ready to hit the door running. And he realized later, oh no, this guy just had a leg amputated. And he just felt about that big. And he was embarrassed, and the brother took it well, and it didn't cause any kind of conflict or trouble. But you see, sometimes that's that. You can't stand that silence. You feel like you got to say something. And sometimes in the impulse, you say something and you just realize later, oh no, kind of that hoof and mouth disease, right? You have your foot in your mouth, and that you'll see that even sometimes with Bible characters, that over impulsiveness. What's the other verse? Romans 10:2. Who's got it? Go ahead, Brother Allen.
For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
Paul's talking about his kinsmen according to the flesh. They have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. They just act on impulse without stopping, slowing down to study and see what do the Scriptures say relative to Christ being the Messiah. Well, look at the evidence. Slow down. They were so zealous, but it wasn't according to knowledge. And so this over-impulsiveness can get a sanguine in trouble. So looking at these positives and negatives, somebody has said we often go in on our strengths and we leave on our weaknesses. We sometimes even say your greatest strengths can also be your greatest weaknesses. So you have a sanguine, they're a life giver, they're a motivator, they're a people pleaser. They're also compulsive talkers, exaggerators, over-impulsive. And what will happen, looking back at that expression, we go in on our strengths and we leave on our weaknesses. Sometimes when we don't appreciate and understand the differences in our personalities, we may say in the beginning, it may be a preacher, it may be a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse, it may be a friend. You meet this person and you may say, oh, he brings so much life. I mean, just so he's adventurous. And that girl may say, I fell in love with him, and he's just so adventurous. And he just makes me want to be a better person, and he's always trying to please me. But then may turn around later on and say, he just won't ever stop talking. Everything, he exaggerates everything. He does everything just by the seat of his pants, always just on an impulse, do this, do that. I get so sick of him constantly saying, what do you want to do? You see how sometimes the same things, he's always trying to push me. Before it was, I just love the way he motivates me to be a better person. He's always trying to push me. Sometimes a guy will say that about a woman to marry her. She's always nagging me. And when they were dating, it was, I just love how she makes me want to be a better person. Isn't that interesting? We go in on our strengths sometimes and we leave on our weaknesses, don't we? And so we need to understand that. That same person that I love her so much, she's the life of the party. I just wish she would stay home for once. Same thing. Same thing. You loved it in the beginning. Now you say, we go in on our strengths and we leave on our weaknesses sometimes. So understand personalities and the weaknesses and the strengths, and I think it will help us. We're going to stop for time's sake right here, but I think next week we'll probably have time to get into talking about the choleric personality. But what I want to stop with right here first is to mention a Bible example of a sanguine. We're going to unpack this next week in a little bit more in depth. But you may have already thought, studying Scripture, thinking of a Bible character. I mean, he is such a strong sanguine, it's ridiculous. Peter. It's Peter. You know, probably the strongest sanguine personality you will see in all of Scripture is the Apostle Peter. Lord willing, we'll talk about that next week and look at those positives and negatives that come out in the life of Peter, and you'll see that sanguine personality. I'm very much looking forward to this study. Thank you so much for your time and attention.